Porky in Wackyland, 1938. 14 weird facts you didn't know. Few cartoons from the 1930s deliberately broke as many rules as Porky in Wackyland. Released in 1938, the short never tried to make sense, comfort the audience, or explain what was happening. And that was the idea from the very beginning. In this video, you'll discover 14 strange facts about the animation that confused audiences, irritated animators within the studio, and quietly changed the boundaries of animated humor. Nothing in it is random, and the nonsense hides something far more unsettling. Fact 1. Wackyland was built to ignore reality completely. From its opening seconds, Porky in Wackyland makes one thing clear. This world does not follow rules, and it never plans to. Gravity bends without warning, doors lead nowhere, and characters move as if logic simply forgot to show up. This wasn't sloppy animation or a lack of planning. Bob Clampett and his team deliberately designed Wackyland to reject coherence, creating a place where cause and effect mean nothing. In 1938, most cartoons still relied on simple setups and clear punchlines. This short tore that structure apart. Porky enters a space where signs contradict themselves, objects melt into jokes, and the environment feels alive in the most unsettling way. The humor doesn't come from understanding the world, but from failing to. That confusion is the point. Wackyland isn't meant to be solved or decoded. It exists to overwhelm, to destabilize, and to force the audience into accepting nonsense as the new normal. And once that happens, there's no going back. Fact 2. Bob Clampett used the short as a creative rebellion. By the late 1930s, Bob Clampett was already frustrated with how predictable theatrical cartoons were becoming. Studios expected familiar gags, clean logic, and stories that reset neatly by the final frame. Porky in Wackyland gave Clampett a rare chance to push back against those expectations. Instead of tightening the formula, he loosened it until it broke. Animators were encouraged to exaggerate timing, stretch movement beyond comfort, and treat rules as optional. This approach quietly challenged both Warner Brothers management and competing studios watching closely. The cartoon doesn't announce itself as a manifesto, but it functions like one. Every bizarre visual reads like an answer to safe storytelling. Rather than polish, Clampett chose chaos. Rather than narrative clarity, he leaned into instability. That rebellion wasn't loud or confrontational. It was embedded in every frame. And while executives tolerated it as a one-off experiment, the response proved something important. Audiences didn't just accept the madness, they remembered it. That reaction gave Clampett leverage, and what followed would reshape the tone of Warner Animation in ways few anticipated. Fact 3. The short was a direct rejection of Disney's perfect illusion. When Porky in Wackyland premiered in 1938, Disney animation dominated the industry with polish, realism, and emotional clarity. Every movement was controlled, every background carefully designed to feel safe and believable. Clampett went in the opposite direction on purpose. Wackyland rejects smoothness, symmetry, and emotional reassurance. Characters don't behave naturally, environments don't obey realism, and beauty is replaced with deliberate awkwardness. This wasn't accidental contrast, it was commentary. Warner Brothers animators were tired of chasing Disney's shadow, knowing they could never out-budget or out-refine that style. So they attacked it sideways. Instead of emotional immersion, Wackyland offers emotional distance. Instead of perfection, it celebrates distortion. The cartoon constantly reminds viewers they're watching something artificial, unstable, and proudly fake. That choice redefined Warner's identity almost overnight. While Disney aimed to make audiences forget animation was drawn, Porky and Wackyland shoves the illusion back in their face, and that refusal to pretend would soon become Warner's greatest creative weapon. Fact 4. The backgrounds were designed to feel uncomfortable. Unlike most 1930s cartoons, the backgrounds in Porky and Wackyland were never meant to feel stable or inviting. Trees twist into impossible shapes, signs contradict themselves, and open spaces feel oddly claustrophobic. This wasn't just visual exaggeration for laughs. Clampett and his team treated the scenery as an active force, not decoration. The world watches Porky, reacts to him, and sometimes seems to toy with him. Viewers can never relax because the environment refuses to settle into recognizable patterns. In an era when animated settings usually guided the audience gently through the action, Wackyland does the opposite. It disorients on purpose. Familiar ideas of depth, distance, and safety fall apart, making every step Porky takes feel uncertain. Even empty spaces feel hostile, as if something might break a rule at any moment. This constant visual tension keeps the audience off balance, reinforcing the idea that logic has been abandoned. And just when the viewer thinks they've adjusted, the scenery shifts again, reminding them this world was never meant to feel comfortable. Fact 5. Porky is not the hero of this world. In most cartoons of the era, the main character controlled the space around him. Porky doesn't. From the moment he enters Wackyland, he is outmatched, outpaced, and constantly corrected by the world itself. Signs laugh at him, creatures mock his expectations, and even basic actions unfold without his consent. Porky isn't brave or clever here, he's reactive. That choice was unusual in 1938, when protagonists were meant to dominate the joke and restore order by the end. Instead, Porky spends the short trying to keep up, surviving through patience rather than strength. The humor comes from his isolation. He behaves like a normal cartoon character trapped inside a place that refuses to acknowledge normality. That imbalance creates tension instead of comfort. Wackyland doesn't need a hero to tame it because it can't be tamed. Porky's role is closer to a witness than a victor, someone drifting through chaos rather than conquering it. And that subtle downgrade matters. It shifts the power away from the character and hands it to the environment, a choice that quietly makes the entire cartoon feel unpredictable and slightly unsettling. Fact 6. The cartoon quietly mocks authority and control. Authority figures usually bring order in classic cartoons. In Porky and Wackyland, they do the opposite. Guards exist, rules are posted, and boundaries are clearly marked, but none of them matter. A sign might warn Porky not to enter, only for the warning itself to be ignored seconds later. Power is present, but it's meaningless. This subtle mockery was intentional. Instead of presenting authority as something to fear or respect, the cartoon treats it like another broken prop in a broken world. Control is an illusion here, just like logic. The guards don't enforce anything, the warnings don't protect anyone, and the rules collapse the moment they're introduced. For audiences in 1938, this was quietly subversive. Order was supposed to be reassuring, even in comedy. Wackyland removes that comfort entirely. It suggests that systems exist only to pretend chaos is under control. Porky follows instructions because that's what cartoons usually do, and the world immediately proves how pointless that behavior is. The joke isn't just visual, it's structural. Authority doesn't fail dramatically here. It dissolves without explanation, and that understated rejection lingers longer than any gag. Fact 7. Sound effects are used to disorient, not to support. In Porky and Wackyland, sound doesn't politely follow the action. It actively disrupts it. Effects arrive late, repeat without reason, or appear where nothing visible caused them. Silence is broken abruptly, sometimes for no clear joke, creating an uneasy rhythm that keeps viewers alert. This was a sharp break from the era's usual approach, where sound reinforced movement and guided the audience through each gag. Here, audio undermines trust. A noise promises one outcome, then delivers another. Musical cues feel fractured, as if the cartoon itself can't decide what should happen next. That instability turns sound into a psychological tool rather than simple decoration. It pressures the audience to lean forward, trying to predict patterns that never settle. Porky reacts to these noises just like the viewer does, slightly confused, a beat behind the world around him. The result is subtle but powerful. Even when nothing visually threatening happens, the soundtrack keeps tension alive. It reminds viewers that in Wackyland, nothing lines up the way it should, and once sound becomes unreliable, the entire cartoon starts to feel unsteady in ways that visuals alone couldn't achieve. Fact 8. The last doo-doo became iconic without any explanation. One of the strangest elements in Porky and Wackyland is how the last doo-doo appears, dominates attention, and then simply exists without logic or backstory. There's no setup explaining who he is, why he's important, or why Porky is supposed to care. The cartoon assumes the audience will accept him instantly, and somehow they did. His rapid speech, erratic movement, and total lack of narrative purpose make him feel less like a character and more like a force. In most 1930s cartoons, side characters existed to serve a clear punchline. The doo-doo doesn't. He disrupts the rhythm, hijacks scenes, and then vanishes without resolving anything. That unpredictability made him unforgettable. Animators later admitted they had no long-term plan for the character. He wasn't designed as a star, yet audiences remembered him more than the plot itself. The doo-doo proved something dangerous and powerful. unreliable. A character didn't need motivation, charm, or logic to stick in people's minds. Sometimes pure chaos was enough, and once that idea landed, Warner Animation would never fully go back to normal side characters again. Fact 9. The cartoon breaks the fourth wall without warning. Porky in Wackyland doesn't politely acknowledge the audience, it ambushes them. Characters suddenly stare directly into the camera, deliver lines without context, or react as if they're aware someone is watching. These moments don't come with setup or explanation, which makes them feel intrusive instead of playful. In most 1930s cartoons, breaking the fourth wall was used sparingly, usually as a clean punchline. Here, it's treated like another rule that can collapse at any moment. The cartoon refuses to let viewers sink comfortably into the illusion. Just as the audience starts adjusting to Wackyland's chaos, the film reminds them that this chaos knows it's being observed. That self-awareness adds an unsettling layer. It feels less like a joke and more like the cartoon is testing how much confusion the viewer will tolerate. Porky himself often seems caught between performing for the world and performing for the audience, unsure which one has control. The result is a constant disruption of immersion. Instead of escaping into animation, viewers are pulled back out again and again, and that tension between watching and being acknowledged makes Wackyland feel strangely modern, even decades later. Fact 10. Many animators thought the cartoon went too far. Inside Warner Brothers, Porky in Wackyland wasn't universally celebrated when it was finished. Some animators felt the short crossed an invisible line between bold experimentation and total creative excess. The concern wasn't that it was bad, but that it was unreadable. There was no clear moral, no tidy resolution, and no guarantee audiences would understand what they had just watched. For a studio still dependent on theatrical bookings, that uncertainty mattered. Traditionalists worried the chaos would confuse viewers instead of entertaining them. Clampett ignored those fears. He believed animation didn't need to explain itself to be effective. That attitude quietly divided the studio. While some admired the freedom on display, others saw it as risky self-indulgence. The short was allowed to exist, but it wasn't treated as a new standard to follow, at least not yet. What those critics underestimated was the long game. The very elements they saw as dangerous became proof that animation could survive without structure, comfort, or approval. And once that idea entered the studio culture, it couldn't be erased, even by people who thought the cartoon had already gone too far. Fact 11. The short was marketed as a regular cartoon on purpose. When Porky in Wackyland reached theaters in 1938, it wasn't promoted as experimental, surreal, or boundary-pushing. Warner Brothers sold it the same way they sold every Porky Pig short. Light entertainment meant to play before feature films. That decision mattered. Audiences walked in expecting familiar rhythms and predictable humor, only to be hit with something openly hostile to logic. This disconnect amplified the cartoon's impact. If viewers had been warned, the chaos might have felt gimmicky. Instead, it arrived disguised as normalcy. Studio marketing avoided drawing attention to its strangeness because admitting the experiment might have scared exhibitors. Animation was still expected to behave itself. By hiding the short in plain sight, Warner allowed it to challenge expectations without triggering resistance ahead of time. The gamble worked. Confusion turned into curiosity, and word of mouth did the rest. What started as a standard release became something discussed, remembered, and debated. That quiet strategy unintentionally protected the cartoon. It slipped past the gatekeepers by pretending not to be radical. And once it was in front of audiences, there was no way to walk it back. Fact 12. Historians later linked the short to surrealist art. Decades after its release, animation historians began re-examining Porky and Wackyland through a different lens. What once looked like pure cartoon nonsense started to resemble ideas found in European surrealist art. The random imagery, collapsing logic, and dreamlike structure echoed movements like Dada and Surrealism, which also rejected reason in favor of disruption. There's no solid record proving Bob Clampett was directly influenced by those artists, but the similarities are hard to ignore. Like surrealist paintings, Wackyland refuses to explain itself. Meaning is unstable, symbols contradict each other, and interpretation is left entirely to the viewer. That lack of guidance feels intentional to modern eyes, even if it wasn't labeled that way in 1938. Scholars argue this is why the cartoon aged so well. It doesn't depend on topical jokes or period references. Instead, it operates on a deeper level of discomfort and curiosity. What once confused critics later earned respect precisely because it rejected clarity. And in hindsight, Porky in Wackyland looks less like a reckless cartoon and more like an accidental bridge between American animation and surrealist thinking, built without realizing it, and stronger because of that. Fact 13. Modern audiences see Wackyland as an escape from chaos. In recent years, Porky in Wackyland has gained renewed attention from modern viewers who read it very differently than audiences in 1938. Instead of viewing the chaos as meaningless, many interpret the short as a fantasy shaped by pressure, confusion, and instability. The world Porky enters feels unmanageable, unpredictable, and hostile to normal behavior, conditions that feel familiar to viewers living through constant disruption. In that reading, acceptance becomes the key to survival. Porky doesn't defeat Wackyland or fix it. He adapts, observes, and moves through it without demanding answers. That quiet endurance resonates today in ways it never did originally. Online discussions often frame the cartoon as an accidental mirror of anxiety-driven thinking, where logic collapses and routine offers no protection. This interpretation doesn't claim intent from the creators, but it highlights why the short suddenly feels relevant again. Its refusal to comfort, explain, or stabilize reflects a mindset many recognize. What once unsettled audiences now feels strangely honest. Wackyland no longer reads like pure nonsense. It reads like coping through absurdity, laughing not because things make sense, but because they clearly don't. Fact 14. Wackyland quietly redefined Warner Brothers' identity. After Porky in Wackyland, Warner Brothers Animation never fully returned to playing it safe. The short proved that audiences could accept chaos, abstraction, and aggression without needing reassurance or emotional payoff. This realization shifted how the studio approached comedy. Animators were given more freedom to break timing, mock logic, and treat cartoons as elastic rather than structured. Over time, that mindset shaped the identity of Looney Tunes itself. Characters became louder, pacing became faster, and rules became tools to bend instead of limits to obey. What made Wackyland dangerous in 1938 became valuable experimentation in the years that followed. The studio stopped trying to compete with Disney's polish and leaned into irreverence instead. That pivot defined Warner cartoons throughout the 1940s and beyond. While Wackyland was never aggressively promoted as a turning point, its influence spread internally. It taught the studio that discomfort could be funny, confusion could be memorable, and breaking rules didn't weaken animation. It strengthened it. And that lesson quietly reshaped an entire generation of cartoons without ever announcing itself. Porky in Wackyland never strange by accident. Since 1938, it has existed to challenge comfort, logic, and expectation, even without announcing that intention out loud. The short doesn't explain, resolve, or guide the viewer. It simply moves forward. And perhaps that is exactly why it remains relevant. Chaos is not a mistake to be corrected, but the very point of the experience. Wackyland does not invite the audience to understand. It invites them to accept. In a world that insists on making sense, this cartoon chooses the opposite, and in doing so, it reveals something unsettling. Not all disorder needs order. Sometimes surviving it is enough.